To order. I'd like to welcome everybody today, Tactical Air and Land Subcommittee hearing. This morning, the Army will be updating committee members on efforts to modernize and update ammunition production and the progress made on these efforts since we last had a hearing on this back in September of 20. We are in person without masks, so I want to first say how good it is to see everyone. It's been a rough couple of years when it has come to the pandemic, but the good news is I believe we're on the other side of it. Doesn't mean we're completely out of the woods, but being with people and having an exchange, I think, is just so much more beneficial. But together we did get through it. So welcome back. And for those on remote, it's good to have you here. And let us continue. The hearing was the start of an ongoing conversation between our committee and the Army, improving the state of conventional ammunition production facilities across the country. Both Congress and the Army are certainly aware of the facilities long due for modernization, and I can't emphasize that enough. I have had the honor of visiting several of these, and having someone who came out of an industrial background, shocking is not overstating the condition of some of our facilities. And I know I'm speaking to those here that understand that, but we want to make sure that when we start talking about single points of failure and supply chain, particularly in an environment that we're living in today in this world, to say this is more important than ever is also an understatement. So the production progress, the tooling, the facilities are all operating much like they did during the Second World War, and that is certainly true. Since September 20, our last hearing, 2 NDAs have come and gone, and in both bills, this committee supported the Army in addition to the baseline, the unfunded priorities, and that was meant to kickstart the process, excuse me, of upgrading, modernization, and safe, efficient production of conventional ammunition. Once again, this year, the budget request does not appear to adequately prioritize the conditions we're looking at to modernize, and we have been very focused on this. So, while it's encouraging to see some movement, the Army is paying closer attention to these facilities. We remain concerned that the Army will lose momentum if these efforts aren't sufficiently funded in the base budget. The Army should not rely on unfunded priorities for these efforts. If these facilities are meant to continue to operate in critical strategic assets that everyone recognizes they are, the funding needs to reflect the importance. And I just want to take a quick moment of deviation from my prepared remarks and just reference the conversations that had been on everybody's lips in this building and others talking about the Stinger and the Javelin. Without Holston, without Radford, that does not happen. As a way to encouraging the Army to achieve realistic and affordable modernization, committee included provision in this year's NDAA requiring the Army to submit to Congress its facilities master plan documenting planned upgrades and improving to the 5 government-owned contractor-operated Goco ammo plants. We're looking forward to reviewing those plans, and as part of our oversight, and I was up till 1:30 in the morning because we're just receiving them, going through them, and we're going to have a number of questions concerning that, both today and moving on. Modernizing these facilities is and will continue to be important to the warfighters and to our industrial partners, the long-term ability to protect our nation. Today, we're pleased that representatives from both the contractors who operate these facilities will be joining the conversation. The people who execute the production and their operation of these sites, their perspective on what the Army is doing, as well as their thoughts on what can be improved, is incredibly important. And today we're pleased to welcome, after being officially confirmed in his new role, as I did welcome him home, is the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, Technology, the Honorable Doug Bush. Great to have you here. And we also welcome back General Daly, Commanding General of Army Materiel Command. Good to have you back, General. And first time to the committee, at least, the Brigadier General Gavin Gardner, Commander of Joint Munitions Command, and Brigadier General William Bordoff, Program PEO for Armaments and Ammunition up at Picatinny, which Mikey represents in New Jersey. We're looking forward to their observation ideas how the Army will continue to modernize and improve ammunition production. We also have, in the second panel today, we'll hear from our industrial partners I referenced who operate these Goco sites. First, we have Brett Floyer, President of Olin Winchester. Olin operates Lake City Army Ammunition Plant in Independence, Missouri, which we visited with Ms. Hartzler. Jason Gaines, Senior Vice President, General Manager of Munition Systems at General Dynamics, and they operate the Goco out of Scranton Army Ammunition Plant, which is on my list. If it wasn't for the pandemic, we would have been there already. And Brian Gaithright, Vice President, General Manager, BAE Systems Ordnance, both Radford and Holston's, which we both have visited, one being in Kingsport and the other one in Radford, Virginia. And John McGinnis, Brigadier General retired, President of American Ordnance, operating in Iowa Army Ammunition Plant in Middletown, Iowa. But first, I want to turn to Ranking Member and our good friend from Missouri, Ms. Hartzler, for any opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to start off and commend everyone for the wonderful job that you did during COVID to keep those plants opened and to keep this capability in production. It's just key, and I know that was an all-hands-on-deck endeavor. And so I just appreciate the work that you did there to make sure that that kept going, because we can't our adversaries don't give up and take time off, and so we had to do it, but you guys did. So thank you for that, and I want to thank our chairman for his continued partnership in keeping this critical topic at a key focus of the subcommittee's oversight efforts. As you know, we oversee all the acquisition for the Air Force and the Army and the tactical air assets for the Navy and the Marines, so there's a lot in our portfolio, but this is so, so key, and I just appreciate that focus. And I'm pleased for this opportunity to be here with our witnesses again to receive an update on the Army's plans and the ongoing efforts to modernize the production of conventional ammunition. As the leadership of this subcommittee, the chairman and I have given this topic our personal attention over the past 5 years, as he mentioned, as you know. In addition to the funding increases and reporting requirements this committee has sponsored in the last 2 NDAAs, we have personally conducted site visits to the 5 government-owned, contractor-operated ammunition production facilities to get a better idea firsthand of the modernization, safety, and operational challenges and the needs that these facilities are dealing with. And as the chairman said, as you know, many of these facilities were built during World War II. And yet we need that capability today just as much, if not more. So it's important that these facilities are modern and safe and operational. These ammunition plants are vital to nearly all munition programs for the U.S. military and the long-term defense of our nation. Many of these plants have been around, as I said, since World War II, and they need improvements. Modernization facilities and machinery, safety upgrades, and the increased reliability of ammunition production are essential for establishing and sustaining a resilient defense industrial base capable of meeting future combat requirements while better supporting both the warfighter and our industrial base partners and workers. As the chairman already mentioned, in addition to increasing the ammunition procurement funding in the past 2 NDAAs, we also include a provision in the FY22 NDAA requiring the Army to provide Congress on a 5-year reoccurring basis the Army's master plans and investment strategy for implementing upgrades and improvements for the 5 government-owned, contractor-operated ammunition plants. With the first submission of the Army's plans due today, I expect our witnesses to provide an overview of these plans and their implementation status during their testimony here today. While I commend our witnesses for your efforts in taking on and addressing the matter of modernizing these facilities, I share the chairman's concerns that the Army continues to insufficiently fund these efforts in the base budget. Unfortunately, the President's proposed budget for FY 2023, publicly released this past Monday, appears to be much of the same. continuing the trend of using ammunition procurement and production-based support accounts as bill payers for other Army priorities. And I also want to hear, and I'm concerned about, with all the munitions and weapons that we are giving Ukraine during this conflict, the Stingers and the Javelins, do we see increased production reflected in what you're proposing this year to backfill those things as well? So I hope you will address that. I expect our witnesses today to address all these concerns and specifically provide how the Army is prioritizing modernization, funding to ensure the necessary upgrades for manufacturing, safety, and infrastructure improvements will be accomplished for this critical industrial base. And like I said, I'm adding a second one here, ad lib, but to make sure, I want to hear more information about how we are replacing the Javelins and the Stingers and the ammunition, frankly, that we are sending over to Ukraine. Are we sufficiently backfilling that as well as to meet our own needs? So I thank the witnesses for their dedicated service. I look forward to hearing from you, and I yield back.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing up the idea of something that we talk about everywhere. And in normal times, it's a dangerous, tough job at those ammunition plants, those depots. During the pandemic, it was incredible, the work that they continue to do, even in the early days when we weren't quite sure what was going on. So to all of you who participated in that, please make sure that you relay back to those folks on the line how much we really do appreciate that. And to our witnesses to here today, we've seen the conditions. We understand the complexity of how we got to where we are. And amazingly, you make it work, even in the toughest of circumstances. But there is risk. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So as I understand it, the Honorable Doug Bush will be leading off with the statements for our panel. So, sir.
Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the House Armed Services Committee, Subcommittee on Tactical Air and Land Forces, good morning. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you to discuss the Army's progress on efforts to modernize production of conventional ammunition across the industrial base. I'm pleased to be joined by General Ed Daly and Brigadier Generals Bill Boroff and Gavin Gardner. We appreciate you making our written statement part of the record for today's hearing. I also want to acknowledge our industrial base partners that will be testifying later today, and more importantly, acknowledge, as both of you did, the workforce at these facilities who worked through COVID. As you've seen, they work in very difficult conditions at times and keep things going and supply the joint force and our allies with ammunition they need. It's a credit to that workforce that we've been able to keep on track, and we owe it to them to improve those facilities. And I just let you know that I'm committed to that, and I believe the Army is committed to that. Mr. Chairman, as the single manager for conventional ammunition for the entire Department of Defense, the Army is responsible for providing superior products, reliable sources of supply at economies of scale to meet joint warfighter and coalition partner requirements in peacetime, wartime, and during national emergencies. I'm pleased to report that there have been no significant shortfalls in conventional ammunition production, despite COVID and other challenges, and the Army is committed to ensuring that ammunition remains available, reliable, and affordable. A vital part of the Army's commitment to continually meet warfighter ammunition requirements is the urgent need to improve production facilities and manufacturing processes to enhance worker safety, reduce environmental impacts, and sustain production continuity. Let me emphasize that our highest priority among those is improving worker safety by incorporating the latest automation technology to, over time, reduce worker exposure to hazardous situations. To guide our way forward, the Army has developed a comprehensive Army ammunition plant modernization plan that, if supported by members, will result in a more resilient, safe, environmentally compliant, and effective organic ammunition industrial base. In addition to our holistic modernization plan, the Army is also focused on eliminating single-point failures, as well as securing the full munitions supply chain through the identification and mitigation of foreign dependency in high-risk areas. While we are exploring new production processes to enhance capacity and improve resiliency, rebuild organic capabilities, and develop new ways to leverage innovation and technologies within the National Industrial Base, Additionally, automated supply chain risk management tools will help us identify and monitor potentially problematic sources of supply and proactively identify potential commercial sources capable of supporting requirements. Before turning to General Daly for his statement, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to discuss conventional ammunition production and for your continued support of our soldiers, civilians, and their families. I look forward to your questions.
Chairman O'Cross, Ranking Member Hartzler, distinguished members of the subcommittee, good morning. I truly appreciate the opportunity to testify today with my colleagues on the modernization of the Army's organic industrial base. 18 months ago, Chairman, as you mentioned, we committed to providing Congress with a comprehensive modernization plan for the Army's organic industrial base. With guidance and intent from both the Secretary and Chief of Staff of the Army and in close partnership with ASALT, I'm proud to testify today that we have met our commitment. We recently produced a 15-year Army modernization plan for the entire OIB, which includes all depots and arsenals as well as ammunition plants. And within the ammunition plant community, both contractor and government operated. As the Army undergoes the greatest transformation in more than 40 years, the 15-year OIB modernization plan represents a once-in-a-generation chance to holistically modernize. With collaboration, input, and feedback from our industry partners, consulting companies, and academia, the plan provides a deliberate and comprehensive roadmap to a 21st century OIB focused on processes, facilities, equipment, workforce, data and information technology, as well as energy and cyber resilience. This three-phase plan represents an estimated $16 billion investment, $8+ billion of which will upgrade ammunition sites alone. This effort will be significant in bringing our ammunition plant capabilities into the 21st century. Critical to modernization efforts are minimizing human exposure to hazards through robotics and remote operating processes, seeking to reduce single points of failure and dependence on foreign suppliers, and building capacity and capability to support the Army and the Joint Force as we move into the future, all while sunsetting and divesting of legacy equipment, facilities, and processes. As Honorable Bush mentioned, the Army, as a single manager for conventional ammunition, has excelled for more than 4 decades in areas of acquisition, production, stockpile accountability, and distribution management. ASALT, Army Material Command, and the ammunition lifecycle managers are completely integrated and synchronized in our roles and responsibilities. Together, we're absolutely committed to providing the Joint Force and our nation's allies with quality ammunition and being responsive at the tactical points of need. AMC directly supports ASALT across the munitions lifecycle, producing, storing, distributing, surveilling, and demilitarizing conventional munitions, with a dedicated workforce of more than 10,000 skilled artisans. And I appreciate, Chairman, you mentioning that today about their professionalism and what they do each and every day. Ammunition plants remain critical to our national defense, and I can unequivocally attest to the performance and responsiveness of the ammunition OIB. Ammunition plants are serving their fundamental purpose of supporting current munitions requirements, maintaining surge core capability and capacity for potential large-scale combat operations, and posturing to support future modern weapon systems. We have made some progress over the past several years, but now opportunities are replete for real momentum going forward. Distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you again for allowing me to appear before you. We truly appreciate Congress's continued support of the Army's OIB, and specifically this subcommittee's support of the Army's ammunition plants. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Are we going to hear testimony? Okay, just to you. First of all, thank you for your remarks, and certainly touch base on a number of the areas that we're going to touch onto today. I just want to start out by setting the framework. We have ongoing operations that are taking place in the facilities the way they sit today. And we talked about you're making it work, but we all know there's risk involved in that. And you provided a plan that we're looking into and have questions on today moving forward. We switched over to the Goco configuration back right at the Second World War, so it would be flexible, that we could use the advantage of having industry and what they bring to the table and be able to ramp up when we needed it and to ramp down. And it's worked, but it's being stressed simply because of the modernization, and obviously we change weapons and the way they work each and every day. So my question is, with the modernization plan, and you talk about 15 years, and we talk about the base budget, which was released just the other day. General Daly, does this fully fund in the appropriate time frame your modernization plan? Because typically, in something that is in dire need of upgrading, you see a large influx of assets in the beginning, because that's where your greatest need is for planning, design, construction. But I'm not seeing it in the base budget the way it came out. So could you give me some clarity on how this gets done in 15 years with the priorities that we're talking about?
Chairman, thank you for that question. The way we've structured the 15-year plan is in 3 phases, as I mentioned. The first phase is really building a foundation for 21st century capabilities, really getting at the most critical processes and capabilities that we need immediately. The second phase is really expanding those 21st century capabilities and reducing our vulnerabilities, as we mentioned. And then the third phase is really continuing to expand beyond that. And I would just tell you, Chairman, that all 3 phases are linked in with the modernization efforts of both the Army and the Joint Force. To answer your question in terms of funding and programming, I feel comfortable that with the way we've laid this out, it's feasible in terms of execution, and that we can still maintain the capabilities that we need in stride to support the organic industrial base requirements over time, and that it is realistic in terms of its programming requirements in terms of the out years. I know you're specifically talking about the budget for 23, but in the follow-on years, as I mentioned, being 15 years, I feel comfortable that the Army recognizes the importance of the investment.
Thank you for that answer. But let me follow, and I'm looking at the chart that was released, and I know it'll be tough from there, but essentially the budget each year is flatlined across there. And what I'm getting to is, from what we've seen and what you know and what is reported, the risk that we are facing today because of the condition of the facilities. And typically, you would see a larger influx in the beginning because this is where we're trying to catch up. Why aren't we seeing that in the plan? Let's put the budget submission aside. Maybe, Mr. Bush, are you able to?
If I could, sir, yes. So I believe ammunition plants specifically, the Army is on a steady level of $500 million a year, 23 through 27, varying between 499.6
Right.
in 23 to a peak of 518.9 in 27. That is based on our understanding of that's historically high, and it's sustained.
No question.
So not peaks and valleys. I can also assure you that when I was there last year and we were working on this budget, this committee's attention to this issue absolutely makes a difference. So members going to plants, talking about it in hearings, conducting oversight absolutely helps us in the Army make sure that these funds are protected across the board. There are potential opportunities to accelerate some of the projects that we would be happy to share with the committee on request. However, sir, there is a limitation on how much funding we can put through this process based on the timelines for construction, planning and construction, while continuing to operate the plants. But we're happy to work through opportunities to accelerate with you, sir.
So we'll get into that a little bit more, and certainly our partners who have shared with us in the past some of their thoughts on doing that. But the good news is, yes, historically high numbers, but it is needed incredibly. Let me just follow up with that, because as we were visiting the plants, The one facility at Radford has a relatively new complex that was getting ready to come online. Incredible facility. The original budget for that facility and the timeline that was laid out, radically different, much longer. It's hard to say there's a typical building, particularly in this type of area, but what's the timeline from you've laid out a plan here for modernization? We know what facilities need to be done. What are we expecting? Because in the past, we haven't really met those. How is this going to be different for these facilities that we're going to be able to lay out the budget, the timeline, and actually roll them on when we need it?
So, sir, if I may, I have our two experts here at the far ends of the table, General Boroff and General Gardner. I could let General Boroff speak specifically about the Radford plant you're talking about that might illuminate some of the larger issues you're pointing to.
Great.
Thank you, Chairman. At the Radford plant, as you know, the nitrocellulose facility that we're referring to, it is on schedule to open up later this summer, so we're excited about that. There were some construction delays as we transitioned some of the partners. We let one of the partners go, and the contractor that runs the plant now took it over.
So would you please, and forgive me for interrupting, is that this was a design build versus a government design build?
It was. What we do, sir, is we do a 30% design, and then we go through about 2 years. Then we do the 60% design, and then once we have the 60% design, we lock it in after 2 years. Then we go to the 90% design about 2 years later. So that's the design phase. I'll use an example of the ammunition plant that we're building for the 6.8. We've just done our second charrette out at Lake City, where we're working hand in hand with the operating contractor as we go through and build that facility. We've been planning that for about 2 years now. And once we get the down select for the next generation squad weapon, we'll be able to dive into that with the contractor to build that facility out correctly.
So the design build is the way that you're looking at for this modernization plan versus there's several other methods you can look at. Are you comfortable with those design build and getting it in on time and budget?
As to the 6.8, yes, we are comfortable with that. We just went through our second charrette there with the operating contractor. We're using their facility as an example. With the government requirements compared to their requirements, they were able to stand their facility up in about 9 to 15 months. Ours will we're estimating about 2 years. The reason for that is the extensive safety requirements that we have as a federal government that they do not have to do on the commercial side.
That's what I'm looking to get at. Could you just give us some clarity on what some of those advantages are that they have that we don't?
So we have to have fire extinguishing processes. We have to have the Halion fire extinguishers at all the bays. They have to have in certain bays where they're just handling certain materials. But our safety professionals came in and said, no, we need them at all bays. So that's a design piece that we didn't have off of their plant out of Oxford, Mississippi that we're mirroring to go to our 6.8 facility. So we have to add the extra safety things in. So we have the DOD and the OSD safety folks come in and advise us what we must and what we need to do for safety. And that adds the time and the additional cost from the commercial sector.
I'm not sure if safety is the one we want to hone in on trying to save money on, but certainly some of the other areas other than safety, typically an ammo plant, fire extinguishers are not a bad thing, and we certainly would do. But let me
Chairman, if I could, I think the other big concern that Honorable Bush and I have going forward is the continued escalation of building materials and labor in this process. And so as we go forward, we just need to continue to look at this. And as we revisit the modernization plan every year, obviously adjusting accordingly based on those potential escalation in prices.
Right. We'll get more to that, but I want to give my colleagues a chance. Ms. Hart, sir.
Thank you. The first question was dealing with the 6.8 and the new next generation squad weapon program at Lake City. So you may have answered it, but I just wanted to make sure. I was just wondering how you're planning to integrate this new round into the production at Lake City, and if you could walk us through some of the facility modernization projects that is going on there. So can you clarify between, you said there's already a facility, but you're building a new one. Anyway, just kind of clarify what's going on there.
I can. Thank you for the question. So for the 6-8 facility, we're actually demolishing an old building on the installation. We're doing that now. That doesn't partake in where we need to go for the new facility. We're waiting for the down select. And as you know, that will happen probably in the next month or two. So once that down select is made, whomever wins that, they have a 10-year responsibility to build the ammunition. About 2 years into it, in 24, 26 timeframe, they'll start working with us. They'll work before that, but we'll actually have a building then. They'll start working on the building with us to make sure we have the facility set up to optimize it as we move forward. And then they will be our second source for ammunition in the future, the winning contractor for whatever round we start building at the ammunition plant.
So what's the first source?
It'll be us. So in 26, we'll be the primary source. 26, 28, we'll take over the mass production of that said round. And our second source will be the winning contractor. So we'll always have a domestic second source, ma'am.
So you build the building, but you work with them on what needs to be inside.
We build the building, we work with the operating contractor, and they work with that winning contractor vendor, and we team together to build the government plant. That's correct, ma'am.
Very good. Okay, great. And Honorable Bush, you mentioned in your statement something that I wanted to hear more about. What are some of the most specific single points of failure and single foreign sources in the ammunition production supply chain that need to be addressed? This is something I'm very concerned about, and I think most everybody in Congress, especially after COVID, are concerned about our dependence on other countries, and certainly as we're producing ammo. So can you kind of let us know what are some of those single points of failure as well as foreign sources?
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. I'll start way out if I could. So, our ammunition production partners and the government, are in a global marketplace for example, precursor chemicals.
Yeah.
I'm confident that we have a good understanding of those supply chains and where chemicals, for example, come from. That can come from, in some cases, China, but also some cases India, but also a lot of NATO allies and partners. And we do a lot of work with Canada, for example. So I believe we have a good visibility of that supply chain. That's step one. Step two is what you're referring to, which is mitigation. So we are constantly looking at ways to qualify additional sources. If necessary, work with our vendors to shift sources from countries less friendly to the United States to more, if it's something that we don't produce in the United States. But that's ongoing work, ma'am. The details of which sources tie to which weapons are sensitive information that I could provide in a different form, but we do have examples of that, ma'am.
Can you say generally some of these sensitive, critical sources that are not available in our country, do we have the capacity to build them here? I mean, do we have those minerals in the ground in some mountain somewhere that we could, if we had the right policy, be able to source from here?
Well, ma'am, I think probably yes, if we chose to. We can do anything in America. We could build all these things. We could have chemical plants. We have them to produce materials. I think it's a question of, as you mentioned, policy. So the degree to which you're comfortable with us sourcing from friendly countries, for example, but also some that are a little less friendly. And those are individual choices we need to make, and happy to work with you on specific examples where you have serious concerns and illuminate our detailed plans.
I would like that. I would be very interested in sitting down with you in a different setting and getting a briefing on what some of those materials are and what we need to do here, because I just think we're very vulnerable. There's a lot of bad guys in the world, and we need to become self-sufficient in many of these defensive capabilities. So thank you. So I wanted to ask again, Mr. Bush, having personally visited several of these ammunition plants and witnessed the dangerous conditions in which some of these manufacturing processes are currently operating, I'm specifically pleased the Army is including machinery and facilities investments in automation and remote operations, and you mentioned that. And you specifically mentioned such plans for the modernization at Lake City. So can you provide an update on how these efforts are progressing and what challenges still remain?
Yes, ma'am. If I could start and then turn to my expert colleagues, if I may. overall, as you've seen when you visited the plants, they are a combination of brand-new things and very old things.
Right.
So one building right beside another, one might be very modern and one might be of serious concern, as you saw. So I think we are making progress, but it will take time. If I could defer to my expert colleagues to add a little more detail
Sure.
on some specific examples.
Thank you, ma'am. So as you know, it's in the study you'll read. We work with Sandia Labs to identify a lot of the safety issues as we go through. They broke it down in 3, 1 to 5 years, 6 to 10, 10 to 15, and the recommendations we go through. We're looking at the infrastructure as we go through to make sure as we put those facilities in, and specifically at Lake City, you know, we're looking at cameras. A lot of inspections done by the people, by the energetics. Honorable Bush and General Days, they both spoke to one of our highest priorities, safety and getting the folks away from energetics. So looking at cameras to do some of the inspections for the primers. I know you've seen that. It's a lot of hands-on. Getting them away from that and having cameras do that. That's what we're looking at, working with Sandia Labs.
So the cameras will do the inspecting, right? I mean, you still
Right.
have to have the hands-on putting the primer in the bullet.
We're also looking at automating that, automation to make that done with robotics. But that is we've got to make sure we have the right infrastructure before we start putting those type of things in.
That's what I wanted to hear. And who pays for that? Is that the contractor, or will you be buying the robot?
So that comes out of our PAA money, Procurement Army Ammunition funding that you give us, and we really appreciate it. At the Gocos, we do that type of funding. It's different at the other installations we talk about, but that is our money that we plan with. The contractors can put, and they do invest their own funding. You'll hear that later this afternoon. And so we do partner with them often as we do these endeavors.
Okay, great. And the last question, I want to get my colleagues' opportunity, but back to my original question. I have 2 goals today: to hear more about the modernization efforts and what we're doing and increase safety and production capability. But the other is to address the shortfalls or what's going on with Ukraine and other parts of the world. So what's the status of the Javelin, Stinger, and ammo inventory that we have now? And does the President's budget adequately address these transfers and needs to backfill, plus to make sure shore up what we have?
So, ma'am, it's a multi-part thing. One thing Congress already did, and thank you, was provide $3.5 billion in the omnibus, a fund that we can draw from to replenish weapons and equipment provided to Ukraine. Mm-hmm. So we already have that money. Congress will very soon get the first of several responses showing how we intend to use that funding. It'll be specifically to Stinger and Javelin, so that is imminent. That first, you'll see the plan to address that near-term thing. The Army has also transferred large amounts of conventional ammunition, as you noted, ma'am. So I expect, I'm working with my DoD colleagues, that will be also something we notify you of using to replenish our stocks out of that $3.5 billion. So that will be money we already have that once approved by Congress, it's a notification process. Once approved, we will get that immediately into the ammo plants to start rebuilding our stocks. Ma'am, if I could, about the different risk areas, it varies. In some cases, what we've provided is a tiny amount of our overall stocks. In other areas, it's a more significant amount. The details are classified, but we can provide those, and you would see which areas are more concerning than others.
Very good. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Sherrill?
Thank you. And General Boroff, I want to thank you for hosting myself and Mr. Bush and local elected leaders. It was really a wonderful visit, and everyone shared my real pride in the incredible work that you and the men and women at Picatinny do. So thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Bush, for coming up to Jersey. We appreciate it. So, Secretary Bush, I think we can all agree on the need to bring our ammunition plants into the 21st century. From your perspective, how do we foster the kind of change necessary to modernize the ammunition industrial base?
Thank you for the question, ma'am. And yes, it was great to get up to Picatinny and see that amazing workforce in your district. Thank you. Well, we have to lead, so the government needs to lead. As I mentioned, under legislation, the Secretary of the Army is responsible for being the single manager for the entire department, so we can't expect others. And I think it starts with what General Daley was referring to, sustained funding across the FIDUP, that we can work with our industry partners to get things moving. I think there has been a definite change in tone in the discussions in the Army with regard to this, and it's largely a product of the great work the committee's done on doing oversight here. So keeping that going helps us as we tussle for resources inside the Army to make sure that these things remain well-funded. So that's one, ma'am. The other is we need to be, and if I may defer to General Daly for a couple specifics, thoughtful and flexible about how we do this, so we're doing it in a modern way and not just falling back into all of our old practices that, as the chairman was referring to, can sometimes add time where it's not necessary.
Congresswoman, thank you for the question. And just to expand on what Honorable Bush mentioned, in terms of framework, the way we've worked this new modernization plan, we did it a little bit differently than in the past. If you were to look at our master planning efforts at each depot, arsenal, and ammunition plant, you would pick up a hard copy document that was done recurringly over a several-year period. And it wasn't dynamic and fluid in nature and didn't really keep up, in some cases, with industry standards and processes. What you'll see now is the transition from those hard copy documents to a data repository that's dynamic, flexible in nature, and that's revisited on an annual basis. And we'll provide the committee with, the subcommittee with that information. But really, not only in terms of the way we looked at how we modernize, but the processes and framework we looked at to get at this modernization effort over time, so that if we can accelerate in certain cases based on funding, we will. If we have cost escalations where we have to defer, we know exactly what moves and we can hold ourselves accountable to the execution of that comprehensive plan that will bring us into the 21st century.
Thank you. And Secretary Bush, what role do you envision for Jpeo ANA in these efforts, and how is Picatinny, as the home of both the Jpeo and the Armament Center, uniquely qualified to carry out that vision?
Yes, ma'am. Picatinny, and more importantly, the people who work there, are absolutely vital and essential to any of this coming together. So as you saw from your visit, that is both a facility where we have people who just manage ongoing contracts and production, but also, just as important, the future. So that workforce that does research and development on, for example, the range of new munitions we're going to need for the extended range cannon artillery system, which I think is only going to be more and more once that is fielded. And as you're seeing from the current conflict, the importance of precision at range and what it can do, I think I only see growth. So I believe that the amazingly talented workforce we have there, as the Army rebuilds its long-range fires capability in particular, but also invests in new small arms ammunition, is only going to see more and more work.
Thank you. And General Boroff, did you have anything to add?
Ma'am, thank you for your visit. Having you there and Honorable Bush there was fantastic for the workforce, showing them the importance of what they do. And as Honorable Bush said, we're working the requirements as we go in the out years. We're working with long-range fires. We're working with the cross-functional teams and making sure whatever the new weapons are, we're building the rounds at Scranton. We're taking them out to Iowa. We're doing the lap there, which is a load assemble. And then we're bringing all that back together to the industrial base. So we're using the whole OIB for these efforts. As has been said before, the 6-8, that's all controlled out of Picatinny, ma'am. So even though it's in other states, that's the nexus of where all the planning starts, working hand in hand with General Garner at the other end of the table at those respective plants. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. I would love to go on, but my time is up, so I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us today. I'd like to get the panel's perspective on where we are in the risk we face today. If you go to 2017, the Association of the United States Army Institute of Land Warfare did a study looking at production of munitions and what the challenges were from that point going forward. What they found in the 2017 study is that about a third of the 3,000 different types of ammunition were actually under supply. So we weren't producing what we needed within that realm. What they also found in that study was that 25% of the current munition stores that we have are 25 years of age or older. So as we look at the risk we take on with aging munition stores, with lack of production capability, I think that's an unacceptable risk. So I want to get your perspective on where do we see the future need, and I say future starting tomorrow, the future need, not only in the munitions that we need to counter the challenges in front of us, but also how do we get that production capability in place and operational as quickly as possible? A great example is we're using up lots of Javelins and lots of Stingers. The Stinger is a circa 1960s weapons platform. Listen, very, very, very effective, but the question is, if we're going to go into production, large scale, to replace the ones that we're using, is it a wise thing to reproduce a circa 1960s platform, or is it something that we ought to look at, something like the Starstreak? The Starstreak 2, 2007, a pretty incredible weapon. If we're going to be doing that recapitalization, shouldn't we be looking in the future? So I want to get your perspective on where things are in the future. And then what are you doing in communications with the industrial base? They have an incredibly important part of this. They are the innovators and creators, and to me, you can leverage them in a lot of different ways. So I wanted to get the panel's perspective on that.
Mr. Whitman, if I could start, sir, on the Stinger specific. I think the approach the Army is going to take, as you know, we have a current requirement for the current weapon, which, as you note, is a classic design but still effective. So I believe we are going to use funding provided by Congress to replenish weapons similar to what we provided our current weapon. However, the Army has a requirement underway, work on a requirement for a new missile potentially underway that will look at the future you're talking about. So I think all the above, sir. So I think we need to get Stinger back in production to replenish our what we've sent, and also to support likely allies requesting more weapons than have happened today. So we're trying to get ahead of that, but also look to start, once the Army decides, a research and development effort to look at a potential new missile with perhaps greater range, sir. But that process in the Army is still underway to determine what the requirements would be for that. But I expect us to do both, sir.
Sir, if I may,
Congressman, let me go first, if you want. Congressman, just to add on to what Honorable Bush mentioned, first I would just tell you that as the Army Acquisition Executive prioritizes efforts for production, and we work collaboratively on production requirements increases over time, I do feel very, very comfortable that we're working collaboratively with our industry partners in terms of making sure that there's no degradation in support of current and future requirements. Feel very, very comfortable that we continue to mitigate any potential shortfalls based on the partnership with our industry partners. And as we look to the future, we continuously reassess our overall requirements by specific type of ammunition as we move into the future. If you don't mind, I'd like to turn it over very, very quickly over to General Gardner so he can give you just a little bit more perspective on it.
General Gardner?
sir, additionally, the quality that our manufacturers produce of really amazing munitions allows us to do a stockpile reliability program that a Joint Munitions Command will read every single munition ever produced in this country. Every 3 to 5 years, it's retested to make sure it performs as designed. When it doesn't, we go to industry to see can it get a service life extension so that we maybe can make those missiles go longer, those rockets go longer, et cetera. And when we can't, sir, obviously that helps inform Jpeo on my right, General Boroff, on an acquisition strategy as we see it in advance of a deteriorating round so that we can maintain that reliability that you are concerned about. Over.
Sir, as far as the programmatic side for the production, in 2016, 2017, we identified we need to up the RDX and IMX. That's what you were referencing to. We're in 2025, we'll have those facilities done. We let 3 contracts last year. They'll be finishing around the 2024 timeframe. The last one we'll let this year to finish around the 2025 frame. But you can see how long it takes to take 8.5 million pounds per year to get to 15 million pounds a year for RDX, and for IMX going from 3 million pounds a year to 8 million pounds a year. It took us from 17, and we'll have it set in 25. But we are getting after it as we identify those. That was an OSD as a single manager of conventional ammunition. They gave us direction, and we've been moving out ever since with the contractor.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Can I just follow up on for both, which Stinger's not in hot production, Javelin is, the propellants and explosives that are used in those are not unique just to those. We use them in many products.
Yes, sir, that is correct. We use them in many products.
Terrific. Mr. Carvajal, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Russia's unprovoked war in Ukraine highlights the Army's need to increase ammunition production capacity at its production installations. As the Army conducts its facilities upgrade, it should also be alert to potential single points of failure in the supply chain, because operational readiness is critical. For example, the government-owned contractor-operated Goco Holston Army ammunition plant in Tennessee produces the majority of explosives used in every lethal system within DoD, from bombs and missiles to hand grenades, mortars, and tank and artillery ammunition. General Baroff, what measures in the Army ammunition plant AAP modernization plan are being taken to reduce single point of failures at its ammunition production facility, and what additional redundancy measures, if any, should be considered?
Thank you very much for the question. That's a multi-part answer. As Honorable Bush said earlier, we're doing an analysis to see where those single points of failures are at. We've done that. We work very close with our OSD partners. As we identify those, as an example, black powder became a single point of contact in June of this year. We had an explosion, but it's the only source. We've gone back, and we've got a second source, which is Wano, powder out of Germany. That's our second source now. We're testing that, and Estes bought out the company, which is GoEx, and we're working with them using the Defense Production Act, Title III, which has funding by Congress to make sure we can stand up that single point of failure and get other sources, as Mr. Bush stated earlier.
Congressman, if I could make a quick comment.
Yes, please.
Congressman, I think the other key piece is that to add on to what General Baroff mentioned is building into the organic industrial-based modernization plan the ability to protect our ammunition plants from both kinetic threat as well as cyber threat. And so we mentioned as an example the increase in production that's forthcoming at Holston, and there's several other points of failure that, as you know very well, exist. But our efforts with investing for protection, I think, are robust in this plan, and our efforts with Army Cyber Command and other organizations to be able to protect upon potential threat in the cyber domain have been significant. And if you don't mind, General Gardner has about 30 seconds of an update he'd like to give you just to answer the other part of the question. Over.
Okay.
Sir, additionally, on top of the cyber activities, and again, we thank Congresses for their funding to enable us to get after the internal controls and other areas that might make us vulnerable in these facilities. It also becomes the efforts to increase water production and water treatment, because in order to expand capacity at Holston in particular, we know we have to upgrade the facilities there to go from 55 million gallons of water a day to maybe up to 100 million, which we'll take it in from the Holston River and turn it back in actually at the same quality, if not better than what we received it, but it'll support the production efforts and do the single points of failure mitigation. Over.
Thank you. The Army has been the single manager of conventional ammunition for DoD, providing central management of the conventional ammunitions for all the services. However, the Army's organic ammunition production industrial base requires critical infrastructure and manufacturing process upgrades to support the warfighter's current and future ammunition requirements. Address continued facility deterioration, increase in safety, and improve environmental compliance. Mr. Bush, do you believe there is sufficient funding to execute the AAP modernization plan? And what additional actions can be taken to accelerate critical upgrades to Army ammunition plants?
Yes, sir. So as far as the budget request before members, the sustained amount of $500 million per year would be historic for the Army in terms of investments in ammunition plants refurbishment. I believe there may be some opportunities for accelerating some of those projects, but these are multi-year projects. As General Baroff was mentioning, we are only now getting close to finishing some work that was done at Holston, started years ago. So I am comfortable with the levels we have in the budget as long as they're sustained across the 15 years General Daly was mentioning. that will get at our most critical items. However, happy to talk to the committee and provide members with opportunities for acceleration of some of the future years' work if that's desired.
Thank you. I'm out of time. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Deschalais. Dr. Deschalais, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the panel for coming before us today. I'd like to spend some time today discussing the Holston Army Ammunition Plant in Kingsport, Tennessee. First, can you outline all the critical work that takes place at Holston and how their work supports the warfighter? And secondly, can you outline some of the issues that Holston currently faces as well and provide some history surrounding Holston's issues with meeting sufficient production capacity in the past?
Congressman, thank you for that question. I would categorize Holston as absolutely critical and essential to the Army's organic industrial base and to supporting the warfighter each and every day. In terms of explosives and the products that are manufactured there, capability is absolutely critical. When you talk about specific upgrades to get to the levels that General Boroff talked about in terms of RDX, HMX, and IMX, behind that are several different projects that really will support Holston into the future. And so I'd like to turn it over to General Gardner and General Boroff to just hit some of those from the standpoint of production and then support of the infrastructure as well.
So, sir, your question about what it supports, basically every type of bomb, hand grenade, tank round, et cetera, the explosives produced at Holston will go to those, and it goes across all of our joint partners. So setting the base, whether it's water distribution, water treatment, it's very hard to do work acids without water. And so what you'll see in this modernization plan is a detailed plan to get after water and to safely return water as needed back to the environment in the Holston River. Additionally, will be additional storage capability for acids and our ability to store acids in order to meet the production requirements over time. And then last is to get after drying, which is one of our most dangerous operations. And you'll see that we are modernizing the drying activities at Holston. Over.
Thank you very much, sir. As was said earlier, the explosives are key to us. The 2016-2017 build we talked about earlier to bring those were U.S. Air Force requirements. So as the single manager of conventional ammunition, we look across all of DOD. So it's not just the Army's munition. This goes in almost all the munitions across the whole OSD. So the importance can't be overstated. They're critical, and we're proud of all the work they do there.
Thank you. In reviewing the current modernization strategy, it does not seem clear to me that enough recognition is given to the challenge of simultaneously executing these massive modernization projects while also meeting production levels. How do you engage with your contractor counterparts to make these decisions concerning cost, schedule, production rates in order to maintain this balance of today's production demands and new construction needs?
That is a very hard balance, and that is very difficult for us. We work very closely with the operating contractor to make sure we maintain it, because as you said, and as you can discern from this conversation, they can't stop production. It's critical for the Department of Defense. Balancing those two is key, and probably we work very close with OEM, and they'll have the distinguished body that they can address that from their perspectives. But that balance is key with the government. We have to manage our expectations, and we manage their expectations, but partnering together is how we make it through that, Congressman.
Congressman, I would just tell you, to give you the confidence of the validity and the feasibility of the 15-year modernization plan, great collaboration with our industry partners, 18 months of work to get here, and very well, I think, synchronized and orchestrated so that we balance between infrastructure improvements and continued production. We'll reassess that every year in our process so that we don't get into a situation where we have a degradation in the ability of the organic industrial base to produce the munitions required.
Okay, thank you. This may be a better question for the contractor panel, but I know my colleague Diana Harshberger, who represents Kingsport, Tennessee, and I share a concern at how the workforce is being taken into account in these modernizations. These communities have a bond with these workers, and there's often generational families involved. How are you considering and balancing these relationships as you look to modernize these AAPs to improve safety and efficiency?
So, sir, what I would tell you is that people are centered to everything that we do at these facilities, and so we work hand in hand with our contractors. As we bring on modernization efforts, it really becomes how are we going to, I won't use the term modernize, but how do we increase the talent of our workforce so that they can execute the new processes and implementations that we're going to do at these facilities. So it's a hand-in-hand requirement, and so that we get ahead of that, so we train the force, we prepare the force as we bring in these new modernization efforts, and I can guarantee the teammates behind me do that as well as part of this plan.
And Congressman, I would just tell you that as we talk about minimizing human exposure to hazards through robotics and remote operational processes, we're really not talking about reducing the workforce. We're talking about realigning the workforce accordingly. Feel very, very comfortable that we'll continue to recruit, retain, train, and treat our great artisan workforce the same way we have for years, and understanding the importance of what they provide the Army and the Joint Force.
Thank you all for your great work. Thanks for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm extremely concerned about some of the budget numbers that I've seen from the Department of Defense. We heard yesterday from General Walters about the potential need to change our force posture in Europe. However, we're also supposed to simultaneously keep the Indo-Pacific as our priority theater. The budget documentation that was sent to my office from the Army states that the FY23 decrease in funding for research, development, and acquisition is due to a reduced requirement for ammunition replenishment. I agree with looking at ways to save money, but we need to do it responsibly and in the appropriate manner. Mr. Bush, does the budget give you what you need for these modernization efforts? And do you believe that the Army is expecting Congress to add funding like we had to do last year when this is all ultimately over? And lastly, after the drawdown in Afghanistan, are there any U.S. stockpiles of ammunition that we are able to draw from that have contributed to the reduced requirement of ammunition replenishment?
Sir, if I could answer in a couple parts. If I could first talk to the money provided by Congress for production. So this is the money that flows into the base. So the Army very much appreciates approximately $100 million that was added to the budget in '22 for additional ammunition production that'll flow into our plants. A second source of funds to assist there will be the funding I mentioned regarding Mrs. Hartzler's question about replenishing munitions provided to Ukraine. That will be additional funding that will flow through the plants that will help. And then, Congressman, your question about '23, that is, of course, up to members to judge whether we hit the target. The Army does, in every year, have to balance across its accounts to prioritize certain things over others. And every year we want to work with Congress to make sure they understand where we accepted risk, and so members can make their judgments about whether we got that right. I'm happy to do that, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bush. I appreciate that. One more question. In 2018, Army Futures Command was established in the great state of Texas. Army Futures Command oversees the cross-functional teams that help address the Army's modernization priorities, such as future vertical lift, long-range precision fire, and soldier lethality. General Boroff, how does the Joint Program Executive Office for Armaments and Ammunition work with the cross-functional teams to ensure that our modernization efforts are in line with the research and development being conducted by Army Futures Command?
Thank you very much. We work very closely to answer your question with the CFTs, the respective CFTs. We're in line as they design the new ammunition for the long-range precision fires. We'll build those rounds. We'll build piece parts for those rounds in Scranton. We'll take them to Iowa, and we'll do load assembly and pack there. So we'll use our entire industrial base to do that. Next generation squad weapon, you mentioned soldier lethality. That falls under them. We're building a new plant out in Missouri, in Lake City. So those are positive things as we move forward. We're going to demolish an old building, build a new facility, work with the winning contractor once they're identified, to build the ammo plants there. We're building all the projectiles for whomever wins out of our facilities now at Lake City. Then we'll start doing the rounds there, probably around 26, 28 timeframe, sir.
Thank you. I just want to say I appreciate all of you taking time to be here today, and I look forward to working with each of you and with my colleagues on the committee here to provide our young men and women in the armed services the training, the resources they need to accomplish their mission. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. We're going to wrap up this section. There's certainly a lot. You're good, Don? Okay. I want to thank, absolutely. I want to thank our colleagues, some great questions, a number of things that we're going to have to dig deeper into. The study that Mr. Whitman talked about, absolutely, those stockpiles critically. But they also pointed out that much of those who are out of date are ones that aren't first on our list, second on our list. But the fact of the matter is we need to be ready to ramp up, and you bring up a great point. Ms. Sherrill talked about the rare earth materials. When we were up at Picatinny with General Malone at the time, we had a list of those at-risk materials. We'd look to get an update on that, and maybe we'll follow up by going up there. But again, we appreciate it. Modernization plan, we're glad we have it. The risk that is involved, the single point of failures, and the idea that you're going to reevaluate each year. But in the event that something does go wrong and there is a failure, those backup plans are critical. Stockpiles, age depends. So I want to thank each of you for being with us today. And this phase of our hearing will adjourn, and we'll bring up our next witnesses. Thank you. at Radford and in Holston, and John McGinnis, who is president of American Ordnance. So why don't we start going from left to right? It's great to have you here today. You heard certainly the plan coming from Department of Defense and the Army and what we need, and want to hear your perspective, not only what you heard, but what your vision is. So if you would.
Thank you, Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Good morning. I am Brett Floyer, President of Winchester Ammunition. Winchester is a key supplier of small caliber ammunition to the U.S. Warfighter, and we proudly operate the government's Lake City Army Ammunition Plant. Thank you for inviting me here today to discuss Lake City and the important role it plays in the industrial base in support of the United States warfighter. Lake City is the nation's only government-owned small caliber ammunition plant employing more than 1,700 highly skilled people. Today, Winchester can operate Lake City at a high level of readiness because of significant historic investments made to equipment, processes, infrastructure, as well as current production funding. However, Lake City is an 80-year-old facility built during World War II. It sits on approximately 4,000 acres with over 300 separate structures, many beyond their serviceable life that must be maintained, updated, or replaced. Winchester engages daily in the development of long-term strategic initiatives with the government in support of the master plan and how it relates to the ongoing modernization and transformation of Lake City. Key and immediate actions needed, some of which are included in the master plan, are ongoing improvements in Lake City safety, manufacturing processes, infrastructure improvements, cybersecurity, and eliminating single points of failure. The tip of the spear that furthers the change of Lake City to a transformational small caliber facility is the 6.8 Next Generation Squad Weapon Program. The 6.8 NGSW will bring transformational safety systems, facility design, manufacturing processes to Lake City, and a new cartridge for the first time in more than 50 years. Winchester has safely and efficiently operated ammunition facilities for more than 150 years, supplying the U.S. warfighter since World War I. While we need little assistance in most areas of the day-to-day operation, there are key areas to consider for maintaining and improving a high level of readiness to serve the warfighter. First, our employees are highly skilled in small caliber ammunition manufacturing, facilities management and construction, equipment design and build, and high explosives operations. Consistent and predictable funding is required to maintain the readiness of this highly skilled workforce and support ongoing modernization efforts. In short, the ever-increasing competitive workforce landscape requires job security that only comes through secure funding. Second, the 6.8 NGSW program is critical to establishing a best-in-class small caliber manufacturing operation and is consistent with the overall goal of the modernization of Lake City. Ongoing funding support for this state-of-the-art program is required. As this new cartridge is developed and stood up at Lake City, we must not lose sight of the fact that funding must also remain strong for the current operations to address key areas of Lake City that are beyond their serviceable life. And last, Winchester does fully support the Army Ammunition Plant Modernization Plan. The plan addresses significant projects required at Lake City to improve technology and critical infrastructure deficiencies that will ultimately maximize reliability and readiness. Rapid modernization and transformation of Lake City requires ongoing partnering between all stakeholders and requires timely decisions to drive successful execution of the plan. On behalf of Winchester's entire workforce, I want to say we are proud of the support we provide to the nation's warfighters. I thank you for the opportunity to discuss Lake City and Winchester's dedication to the mission and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before the subcommittee to testify on the possible ways and means of successfully modernizing the U.S. production of conventional ammunition. I am pleased to be joined by my fellow witnesses, all of whom I have personally worked with and respect as distinguished industry colleagues. I also wish to acknowledge our Army leadership present here this morning, whose mission we all proudly serve. I also wish to thank this committee for your continued support of the ammunition industrial base, as well as your keen interest in the needed modernization of our vital production enterprise. I am honored to be here today representing General Dynamics Ordnance and Tactical Systems as the Senior Vice President of the Munition Systems Business Unit. In addition to serving as the systems integrator for over 60 configurations of fielded ammunition end items, General Dynamics Ordnance and Tactical Systems is also the most prolific producer of energetics, components, and subsystems servicing the U.S. munitions and missile sectors. Our Munition System Business Unit is dedicated to providing full families of tactical and training ammunition across all medium and large calibers of ammunition. I am especially proud to be representing our 1,600 employees operating across our 10 operating locations. My focus today pertains on our Scranton operations, where we operate the Scranton Army Ammunition Plant. General Dynamics took over operation of the Scranton plant in 2006 when General Dynamics acquired Chamberlain Manufacturing, and we have been the continuous operator ever since. The dedicated 265 Scranton employees produce metal parts or projectile bodies for all U.S. Army and Marine Corps artillery programs, as well as Navy 5-inch 54 programs. The Scranton Army Ammunition Plant is truly a national strategic asset, producing in excess of 28 million artillery and mortar projectile bodies over the past 60-plus years. It is a highly specialized manufacturing center with production capabilities and capacities unmatched anywhere in the free world. Our Scranton workforce is proud of its safety record and the reliability of its products in support of our U.S. artillery and mortar units in the battlefield. At the present time, the Scranton Army Ammunition Plant faces a dual challenge in modernizing both its aged infrastructure as well as its production capabilities to meet current and future mortar and artillery needs. This is particularly challenging as we are preparing to produce the next generation of artillery projectiles that will be fielded as part of the Army's artillery modernization efforts. This will involve introduction of multiple new projectiles configurations, each requiring some level of unique production equipment and tooling. More importantly, though, is the need for critical infrastructure upgrades that are an absolute imperative in restoring the requisite production capability required to fulfill Scranton's core mission. Our Army customer has been actively working with us to identify and fund these critical infrastructure improvements, with several Scranton facility projects being ready for funding, award, and execution yet this year. This includes an imminent award to modernize Scranton's production capability to support the production of the next generation 155mm XM1128 projectiles. We applaud the U.S. Army's innovative thinking and approach in accelerating this effort and award. My primary concern is the need to maintain a continued focus on this type of transactional velocity, the ability to obligate funding and execute modernization scope on time and under budget. I believe this is the way that we, the U.S. industrial base, can meet the U.S. Army's long-range precision fires modernization and fielding timelines with an urgent and collaborative strategic focus. The Scranton Army Ammunition Plant will remain an integral component of the U.S. Army's artillery modernization success. Our proud Scranton team, in conjunction with our U.S. Army stewards, stand ready to not only meet this modernization challenge, but exceed the fielding objectives of the U.S. Army's must-have long-range precision fires mission. I look forward to answering your questions and informing a success path for modernizing the U.S. production of conventional ammunition. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
Good morning. Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me here today to discuss modernizing and sustaining the Army's ammunition facilities. I will deliver an abbreviated statement now and ask that my full written statement be entered into the record. I'm grateful for the opportunity to provide industry perspective on this important mission and the people who support it. As a quick introduction, BAE Systems is the operator of two Goco sites, the Radford Army Ammunition Plant in Radford, Virginia, and the Holston Army Ammunition Plant located in Kingsport, Tennessee. These two sites are essential to Army's firepower mission across a range of platforms. I am proud of the work that we do in support of the U.S. military. Through our unique heritage, BAE Systems is qualified as an explosive chemical manufacturer. As the industry leader in energetics manufacturing, we are committed to partnering with the U.S. government on modernization. Before I go further, I want to take a moment to highlight and put a spotlight on the dedication of the people at Radford and Holston during the COVID-19 pandemic. They, along with our defense industrial-based colleagues, showed up every day under difficult circumstances to deliver the readiness to our warfighter. They absolutely deserve our gratitude. While it may appear on the surface that Goco sites have common themes and adjoining elements, not all Goco sites in the organic industrial base are created equally. Radford and Holston have common elements like large asset chemical plants and specialty chemical production, while the others focus on mechanical load and assembly pack facilities or storage and demilitarization. It should be our highest priority to continue to modernize and transform Radford and Holston into state-of-the-art chemical processing facilities, as our nation's entire munition supply starts at these two sites. This is vital for our national security. I want to share three perspectives about the important challenges of modernizing facilities like Radford and Holston. First, the modernization of these sites is a long-term journey. These are capitally intensive, and projects of any meaningful size take years to execute. Both sites have undergone limited modernization over the past 20 years. The commitment to a long-term strategy, as well as stable and predictable funding, is essential to transforming and modernizing Radford and Holston through complex projects that will take place over time. Second, more funding, even above the Army's recommendation, accelerates improvements for the scale of modernization required. Over the last decade, these sites have seen improvements, including a $1 billion investment in research department explosives, otherwise RDX, capability at Holston, and tens of millions of dollars of investment in a new nitrocellulose facility at Radford. BAE Systems itself has invested more than $100 million at both sites combined. While this is a substantial amount of funding, I think it's important to understand these investments are only for building replacements to maintain current processes. There has not been timely, adequate, or predictable funding at a rate necessary to develop new, modern facilities that meet the needs of the 21st century operation that is both safer, more reliable, and environmentally friendly. We need a greater focus on long-term operations rather than just managing day-to-day fixes. Recognizing the capital-intensive nature of this work, we believe that reasonable periods of performance should be a standard across all Goco contracts. I recommend a performance period of no less than 25 years to give contractors the opportunity to invest and realize necessary returns on those investments. Finally, while the strategy defines projects and funding levels, the current modernization strategy does not adequately recognize the challenges of simultaneously exercising modernization and meeting production levels. I emphasize this not as a criticism of the strategy, rather as a focus on the work that Army and industry must engage to modernize these facilities. There are real and difficult trades around cost, schedule, technology, and production rates. If we are to execute modernization successfully, then we must find an approach that strikes that right balance between today's production needs and construction of tomorrow's future plant. I'd like to thank the subcommittee again for bringing attention to this critical issue and recognizing industry's role in this important mission. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. General?
Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the Tactical Air and Land Forces Subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify about this important subject, and it's an honor for me to be here with you today. I think I offer a unique perspective on this challenging task because I have literally sat on both sides of this panel. My last duty assignment, while on active duty, was a Program Executive Officer for Ammunition and the Commanding General of Picatinny Arsenal. More recently, for the past 5 years, I have been the President of American Ordnance, responsible as the operating contractor for both the Milan, Tennessee, and the Iowa Army ammunition plants. Both of these facilities are over 30 square miles each and were built in 1941. They are big and they are old. While the Milan facility is a state of transition, the Iowa plant provides the nation a facility in size, scope, and surge capability unmatched in the national organic industrial base. The purpose of the Iowa facility is to load and assemble and pack medium caliber and tank munitions, C4 products such as the M112 block, and the mine line clearing charge, energetic products such as mortar prop charges and modular artillery charge systems, indirect fire products such as artillery and mortars, and unique warhead capability, producing warheads for Javelin, Stinger, Hellfire, Sidewinder, and additional specialty warheads, to include supporting the Department of Energy. The first topic you asked me to discuss was an explanation of current modernization initiatives. In the case of the Iowa facility, the major initiative is a long-range precision artillery production facility. We are just completing the 30% design phase of this important capability. We'll complete the 90% design phase in the summer of 2023, and we will enter the construction phase beginning in the government's fiscal year 2024. We were fortunate that early on in the planning process, Dr. Bruce Zeddy visited the plant when he was the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology. The visit prompted him to not only draft his vision for the Iowa facility, but also draft up a set of planning tenets that subsequently became the planning objectives for future modernization projects across the Army's organic industrial base, as outlined in the Army's Ammunition Plant Modernization Plan. The second topic I was asked to speak was if there are any modifications of law, regulation, or practices. I would suggest two, but in the interest of time, will refrain from going in more depth, but would be happy to address in questions. The first is a review of Title 10 U.S. Code 2692, entitled Storage, Treatment, and Disposal of Non-Defense Toxic and Hazardous Materials. The specific request would be to allow Goco contractors to lease space to commercial contractors that use explosives, such as the mining industry. These lease fees can bring in revenue to help reduce the operating contractor's overhead costs due to meeting the government's performance work statement requirements. The second item would be more widespread use of FAR Clause 52-216-4, Economic Price Adjustment, Labor and Material. In today's rapidly changing environment, translating into increasing inflation rates we have not seen in decades, this is becoming more and more difficult to get price quotes that are valid for longer than 30 days. As defense contractors, we must take these short-term quotes and respond to government solicitation asking for 5-year, sometimes 10 years, firm fixed pricing. And I can understand why the government likes firm fixed price contracts. However, in today's environment, I'm not sure the Department of Defense really gets the best value in these instances. The last item you asked me to address would identify any other consideration for Goco operations. In this area, I would suggest a recognition of the unique costs put on government in running a Goco. One of the challenges confronting Goco operators is the Army has a set of requirements written in the form of performance work statements that the operating contractor must perform. These costs are then rolled up in the pricing of the products we make. Some of these requirements are above and beyond which a contractor at a commercial facility would incur. In the case of Iowa, we must compete for our business. When compared to a commercial facility, this is like your competitor running a 100-meter dash when you have to run 120 meters. But I want to be very clear. We're not looking for a handout. What we're looking for is a level playing field to compete, and then it's up to us. In summary, I want to thank you again for allowing the operating contractors to participate in the discussion today. The organic industrial base is a crucial component to the overall national industrial base and forms the nation's insurance policy, especially when it comes to wartime surge requirements. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to your support of these vital facilities and to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Took several notes, and it goes to the heart of why we wanted you in. The relationship that started under Goco's decades ago was because your power, your experience, your workforce, your ability to be flexible, and certainly your technical expertise. That's why you're here. The partnership that you have is unique in ways that are very different than normal industry, but in most ways, you're a business. You're running it, and there's risk, but there's also reward. And trying to get that right for both sides is always the challenge. We have a new modernization plan. Each of you spoke to your input on it. I'm not going to ask you, did it reflect it in the end product? We can have those conversations later, but obviously making those decisions are based on the information that you gave them, but also what they know and what they want to have. So we have a plan, and it's coming together. There's risk. I've been to most of the plants, and some of you have a lot more risk than others because of the facility. Generally, you sat on both sides of the table, and you understand it. And when I get a chance on the second round, I want to ask you about some of the items that you brought up. But are we using you effectively in the contractual relationships we have? And you're each unique. We compete. You use 25 years. That's a lifetime. We like to think 2 years is a lifetime. We live in those cycles, so we do understand that. But to make investments, are the incentives that we've set up working? What can we do better? So why don't we start with you, Mr. Flower?
Well, I think the first part of that question was related to our involvement in the the development of the modernization plan. As I mentioned in my opening statement, I do believe that we are engaged quite a bit with the Army and the government as a whole in the development of the needs of Lake City. That starts at the very low level of us producing a call letter list that identifies the key areas of concern of projects that need to happen at Lake City to support the modernization. It gets rolled up then into an ADEP plan, Area Development Execution Plan, and then focuses up to the modernization plan. So I do feel that we have a lot of input into that plan.
This is for each of you. When you put that plan together, obviously you're looking through your lens. You're not necessarily, or are you including that single point of failure into those calculations? Or does that take place once you submit it?
I think that really both. I mean, it's part of the thinking and going into the plan, but it also is part of that execution and after the plan is put together. On our single points of failure at Lake City, those are identified very clearly in our plans. We currently work on each one of those to identify alternative materials, alternative supply, and we have inventory strategies to mitigate as well. Yes, sir.
Thank you for the question. Number one, I think that the plan very much took into account what we were looking for at Scranton. I mentioned in my testimony there's two elements really at Scranton. We're preparing the facility for a number of new projectiles that are going to support the Army's artillery modernization plan. That's one element. The other element is the infrastructure piece of an aged facility. I think the plan has elements of both that we have submitted, worked with our Army customer. I think there's some prioritization and some timing challenges or changes that we might want to see, but overall we were very pleased with what came out in that plan. In terms of whether or not we're being used effectively, I do believe that our partnership leverages that to the greatest extent possible. The Army is absolutely collaborating with us as we develop these modernization plans. And I'm confident that our input is taken into consideration, and that's reflected in the plan that was submitted. And I think that just speaks to the partnership that we continue to have with the Army.
So looking at the plan, I think generally our inputs were well taken and reflected in the plan. So there was good coordination, as my colleagues have pointed out. On the effectiveness question, I think I would point to three things. For each of our sites, there's some unique commercial aspects of what we do. So I'll borrow Mr. McGinnis's analogy of running a 100-meter race, but actually being asked to run 120 meters. And that makes it very challenging for us to take advantage of the commercial opportunities that these sites could access, which would improve affordability for the Army. Similarly, for the Army, is workloading these facilities. These are U.S. government sites, so bringing as much work as possible to these sites, while it does benefit the contractor, is really about the best benefit to the U.S. Army and the taxpayer. Secondly, the reference to 25 years. If I look to my commercial chemical colleagues, when they proceed to build something like a large assets facility, which we've just completed in Holston, They don't have to contemplate that investment in the thought that within a short period of time, much less than 25 years, they might turn the keys to that facility over to another operator. Makes the investment really challenging. Lastly, on the effectiveness, I think Radford and Holston represent a place where the Army and contractor have improved significantly through the modernization journey. This morning's comments highlighted both the challenges in the NC facility at Radford and then spoke to what we've done at Holston in terms of a massive $1 billion modernization around RDX. And you see those projects being executed well and on time to deliver that capacity and improve both safety and environmental performance at Holston.
Sir, I appreciate the question. The first part of that question about the modernization plan, I would say that we did have a lot of input. There was a lot of discussion. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of priority shifting that has to be set forth. I agree with Mr. Gathright, and even back when I was in uniform, I always saw the ammunition enterprise as a big tree, but the trunk of that tree is Radford and Holston, because without propellant and explosive, there is nothing else. And so we have to get that right as a nation. And then beyond that, the branches and the leaves, that's where the rest of us come in and be able to do that. And so that's what you see in the modernization plan, an emphasis towards the Radford and Holston, and then later on would be, facilities like Iowa that we're going through the design phase now, then the other facilities listed in the plan. In terms of clarifying from our perspective, the 25 years that Mr. Gathright brought up, a lot of times it would be nice to have the 25 years set. Right now, we're currently under a 25-year contract, but it goes under 5-year increments. And so if you are an investment, and the other companies are commercial companies, whereas we're a Day and Zimmerman company, a private company. So for us, it's 3 owners. If we're asking our owners to invest in a facility that every 5 years their option could be up, it's very difficult for them. But they won't. But it's not that they won't do it. They've invested over $45 million of their own dollars since American Ordnance has taken over in 2008. So they'll do it. But there is a certainty that has to be there. And in terms of are we being used effectively, it's a complex. It's a very complex environment that we're in, but I would say that everyone is trying their best to make sure that everything is set and our voices are heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Vicki?
Thank you. As you know, last year, the Army came over with a recommendation that severely cut down the number of small caliber ammunition as produced, and it would have resulted in the loss of about 500 jobs there at Lake City. And these are individuals who've worked for years, have an expertise. Many of it, their parents work there, their grandparents, and I just want to thank this subcommittee, the chairman who helped us lead the effort to make sure that money was replaced. And I wonder if you could talk, Mr. Pfluger, about the importance of just having a steady state of budgeting and what that does when the government comes in and cuts it, and what severe ramifications that could have provided for our national defense. And I'd like for all of you to talk about that just a little bit, because that's something the subcommittee has to watch out for.
Sure, thank you for the question. So you're right. If that original budget would have been executed, we would have lost about 500 of our 1,700 jobs there at Lake City. And to us, it's very critical for a lot of reasons. One, we are asked to maintain a level of readiness in our contract at Lake City, and it's very difficult to do that if production funding goes down too much. But probably the most important aspect of reduced budgets and layoffs that may occur when that happens is related to the skill of our workforce. We make ammunition, small caliber ammunition. In the process of making that, we deal with high explosives. We have almost 90 people that we rely on to be well trained in our high explosives operations and our priming operations. If we lose that workforce and the requirements go up, or there's a national emergency, we just can't hire people and train them fast enough. It could take up to a year to train people to get back to that level of skill that we require. So in the art of making ammunition, the skill of our workforce is critical.
Very good. Mr. Gaines, quickly.
Thank you for the question. I echo everything that he just said about the skilled workforce, but I'll also highlight the importance of our supply chain. Many of us depend on a robust supply chain. Much of that is made up of small businesses, and we have these cyclical dips or ups and downs, specifically the downs. It doesn't incentivize them to continue in that role, and therefore your supply chain will get degraded as a result. And I think that's very critical when it comes to budget matriculation.
Thank you. Mr. Gathright?
Yeah, I'll echo the same things, but add a couple here. With respect to readiness, we are at the same time talking about minimum sustaining rates while also talking about surge capacity. So that is very difficult to try and talk to a workforce that is really artisan in what they do. And then on the modernization side, we're really talking about highly skilled engineers, construction professionals, and program managers. So being able to have a transparent and level-loaded approach to modernization funding is critical to retaining those jobs in this kind of difficult setting of a Goco versus operations outside of this kind of environment.
Thank you. Mr. McGinnis?
Ma'am, I really do appreciate your thoughts on the workforce because that is the driver. When the nation built these ammo plants back in the 1940s, they didn't build them in Fairfax, Virginia. They are out there. And in many respects, they are the main employer for some of the areas of which we're in. And as you mentioned, this is a family lineage of people that have worked at our facilities. And I consider it a moral obligation that we provide good paying jobs for the people in that area. And our operators are, as the gentleman has spoke, they're truly craftsmen. I mean, to operate a 310 press to build a Stinger warhead, a Javelin warhead, takes experience. Or if you are working 800 pounds of molten TNT, producing TNT rounds, you want to have somebody with experience. Yeah. And a state level of funding allows us to be able to maintain a talented workforce. Thank you.
Yes, yes. Mr. Gaines, you oversee the Scranton facility, and in the Army's testimony, they said that there's going to be future investment will repair and replace failing infrastructure as well as install a new manufacturing line to support production of the next generation of artillery metal parts. Who pays for that new manufacturing line? I'm still trying to figure out who pays for what.
The Army pays for that.
The Army pays for that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, very good. And then I had a couple questions here. Mr. General McGinnis, you had some really great points in your testimony. I think the idea of incorporating the mining industry and utilizing them to have on the site and lease areas, that's something that makes sense to kind of spread the load, bring in some additional investment, and then I think we need to look at this price fixing. That was a good point. But I wanted to ask you about the performance work statements where you said there's 6 specific areas where you have to comply that the commercial industry doesn't, and safety, fire, security, environmental, material management, maintenance. Do you have a list that breaks down these specific requirements that you have to do that's above commercial, like a comparison between commercial and then what you do in the same areas that we could look at and maybe should review?
We can provide you that list, okay. Certainly. For example, we have a fire department and with EMTs that have to be operational 24 hours a day. If a lot of commercial facilities, they would just say opt out and come to an agreement with a local fire department there. We have a 56-person security force that operates the gates 24 hours a day. We have different in terms of safety and environmental inspections, which need to be done and should be done. There's a balance of what is done on a commercial facility, but then there are things to meet Army policies, Army regulations, things of that nature.
Okay, thank you very much.
But I can provide
that. Yield back.
And those are the sort of lists we're looking for. Very important. Yes, you're up.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman.
Dr. Deitchle.
We touched a little bit on the prospect of the Army entering into longer contracts, but from a contracting perspective, what could the government do to improve doing business with industry at Goco AAPs? And you can all chime in.
Sir, I'll start with kind of where I left off in my last comments around the commercial opportunities that are at each of these sites. For Holston and Radford, we provide both the propellant that goes into small caliber rounds that are used by hunters and sportsmen, as well as explosives that are used in various oil and gas opportunities from Holston. So making these accessible, and when we think about trying to do commercial work on a Goco site where there are these additional regulations that we're complying with, making that accessible for the contractor such that we can bid economically for those opportunities ultimately reduces the cost of operation to the Army for these sites. I think it ties back to the comments from Ms. Hartzler around the PWS work statements. You know, Radford has just gone through a renegotiation of its contract, and this was an area of focus. I'll say for contractor and Army, there's a lot of frustration about how much these work statements cost the government, but yet we're bound by these requirements in ways that we cannot get to more efficient solutions that are certainly available if we operate it in a more commercial fashion. So I think getting that balance right helps the Army get the most out of the Goco part of this.
I'd like to add that I think in terms of improving, contracting relationship and execution, more importantly, I think is the speed in which we go through these contracting actions. I think there's a lot of great intent by all parties, and it often seems to get bogged down. And it's no fault of contracting command or any specific agency. It's as an enterprise, we all need to do a little better in terms of executing those contract requirements, especially when it comes to modernization. I think that velocity would really improve things.
I really agree with my colleagues on really studying some of the best commercial practices that are out there and maybe applying those to some of the Gocos. It definitely adds a lot of cost, and maybe studying those best commercial practices in each one of our situations would be very helpful.
I would just like to add on that, again, the recognition of the performance workstation statements, understanding where that is in terms of the requirements that we are then bringing into our pricing, and then having, say, a predictable level of contracts. As Mr. Gathright said, not all the Gocos are treated equal, you might say. And so for us, operating Iowa, moving forward, there is no set, say, supply contract where the government says we will be issuing you contracts in these type of areas, which is needed in the explosive and propellant areas. But in Iowa, it's not. So for us, what we would be asking for is a recognition of these. That's all.
Okay. One other question. What does the industry perceive as the most significant threat to the ammunition enterprise supply chain?
I think it's the same that we discussed earlier. It's the significant, having significant secured funding that has continuity from year to year, that encourages our supply chain to make investments. Right now, we struggle with certain supply chains to make investments because of the uncertainty of a 1-year, 2-year contract and not knowing what it is. And that's a challenge also from single points of failure in the supply chain as well.
I'd like to add back to the labor point that Mr. Floyer brought up earlier. Attracting new talent, new young talent into our industry is challenging right now. And that continued funding and that continued pursuit of modernization, not just in facilities but products, I think is critically important to attracting the next generation of talent, which we're always working to do.
I would focus in on the workforce. As much as we talk about single points of failure or overseas sourcing, it's that artisan workforce. And honestly, really looking at the Kingsport area, there are opportunities in the market if we think post-COVID economy. And folks are asking themselves, is this the right job for me as Holston goes through a competition and as they look at opportunities outside of the base? So I think protecting that workforce and growing that next generation of the workforce is essential, first and foremost, to what we do.
Sir, I appreciate the question. In many respects, I would say the most significant threat is a threat we haven't been seeing or thinking about. It seems like we deal in threats every single day, but I think, to agree with the panel, the workforce is paramount to be able to keep them, to be able to attract new talent from the colleges and universities nearby. Supply chain is something that we worry about constantly. There's a bunch of different alligators out there.
Thank you all for your expertise in being here. I yield.
Yeah, Mr. Jackson.
Well, this should be pretty quick. My colleague from Tennessee just asked most of what I was going to ask you about. I was going to ask you about single point of failure in the supply chain, and you kind of addressed that already. There's not a single point of manufacturing. We don't get like a certain, element of the ammunition from one specific supplier or anything like that. Is there anything like that that we should be worried about? I guess would just be expand on what he just asked a little bit. And the other was, I was going to comment that, we have defense industry in my district. We have Pantex and we have Bell Helicopter there. And when I go talk to them, the biggest issue they have, which I think is a big national security issue for us, is the workforce. I mean, they cannot get people to do the jobs, to come to work. And I mean, it's a little bit harder because it's Amarillo, Texas, and, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. But are you guys experiencing the same kind of issues? It sounds like you are. And I think you gave a little bit of information, but I was going to ask just like what would be your advice to other companies to overcome this? Because if you can't find people to do the job doesn't get done. So thank you.
I'll go first this time. Thank you for your question, sir. Number one, in terms of advice that I would give to some of our industry peers is you have to absolutely demonstrate to your prospective workforce your core values, your strategy. You've got to really put an emphasis on, the culture within our organization. And I don't think that's something that in the past we really had to emphasize. And now we're really out there in terms of marketing our company for a recruiting purpose, not necessarily for a customer purpose. And so I think that's really critical. The earlier question you asked about single points of failure, when it comes to Scranton Army Ammunition Plant, there are other competitors with like capability. So in terms of a single point of failure for Scranton, that really isn't the case.
Okay.
I'll chime in there. I think, Pantex is a critical partner for Holston for the products that we provide on the DOE side. So we talk a lot with our colleagues at Pantex up in Amarillo. I think on the overcoming the challenge, the thing that I feel like our employees do well is really aspire to the mission. And that really reflects on what we've done through the COVID-19 pandemic. These people put themselves at personal risk to deliver munitions that were absolutely essential. And I think that is the part that we've got to continue to bring home to the workforce to have folks want to come and work on these kind of sites. I think one of the highlights of the work on the RDX expansion at Holston is really trying to address some of those single points of failure. So I think the Army is getting that right as we move forward. And lastly, I would just focus on the foreign sourcing, because this is a key focus for us, so some of the raw chemicals and upstream products that we use. And I think these are absolutely accomplishable things in the United States, but they're not without cost. And I think that's the part of this that we've got to hit face on to understand how to move beyond some of these foreign sourcing challenges.
Thank you, and I will say I think that one of the things that I hear that works sometimes is to focus on recruiting on retired military folks and folks that are transitioning out of the military, because I think that they have somewhat of a natural fit for some of this kind of stuff, and so thankfully there's a lot of folks that get out of the military and want to continue to serve international security position or a job that's pertinent to our national security. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. There's a few extra questions that we're going to go in the next round if you have time, and really appreciate it. Couple of items, domestic supply chain. Yes, we do things that have environmental regulations. Labor standards are considerably different. Safety has a cost, but it also has a cost if you don't have access to it. So that's the balance, and I think we're starting to realize that the pandemic and the supply chain certainly brought that out on us. New young talent. There's not a committee that has a hearing that this doesn't come up. Particularly, you are unique in the sense that, come work in a place that really dangerous stuff that can kill you in a heartbeat. Not every position you need to be a PhD from Harvard. I understand I went to the other four-year school. It was called an apprenticeship. Society has to make some changes that we value both of those, and that you can have a good job that has benefits and raise your family. And each of you, that's what is critical, is you take care of your employees. And they need to understand it. The pandemic has thrown the curveball. Everybody is evaluating their spot in the universe. And it's going to continue for a little bit. And our families go through the same thing. But when we start talking about investment, and each of you, the major investments, and that's a relative term, you know, the government is going to pay for the facility in the most part. So when we talk 25 years, yes, you're not going to invest $1 billion in a plant for 2-year length of time. There's some things that contractually they can make decisions on, and there's other things we have to change. The NDAA is revving up again. Please, Liz is our lead on this. Those ideas that you mentioned, please expound, get it to her. We want to have a conversation where if this is a good idea, I'd love to try these things in a pilot. So we really do, that's why you're here today. And certainly the material cost fixed pricing, depending on how long, right? It's all relative. So we want to talk about that, and certainly level playing field is something that we deal with every day. But I want to give Vicki a chance to go second set, and then we'll wrap this up.
Thank you. So as the managers of these Goco facilities, do you agree with what we just heard in the first panel, where the Army is proposing $500 million a year funding for a 15-year modernization plan? Do you think that adequately accounts for the rises in cost for both materials and labor due to inflation and material shortages, which General Daly highlighted? What's your thoughts on that? Why don't we go backwards here? So, McGinnis.
Well, ma'am, I appreciate the question, and I appreciate leading this off. You know, it's a balance of priorities. I think the Army showed a very significant commitment to these facilities. My initial remarks back to the Army was that I was very impressed that the Army put projects in dollars in years. That's something that we haven't seen before. And I think it's very important to at least put a mark on the ground. This is what it is. Things can change, but at least it was significant for the Army to be able to do that. So I do appreciate that.
Good. Mr. Cathright?
Yeah, I'd start with the fact that it is a significant increase in the investment that the Army's made. I think two things strike me. Certainly in the near term, volatility in the marketplace is critical, both in raw materials and labor. So that does have a critical impact on some of these modernization construction projects. I think the other aspect of this, and I referenced this in my opening comments, of, you know, at least in the case of Radford, I can speak to, there are shovel-ready projects today that would benefit the workforce that are in this plan, but could be funded sooner if additional funding were allocated. And these would be improvements to operational readiness as well as safety and environmental. So these are projects that are there today where designs are complete.
Can you get us a list of those?
Yes, I can.
Thanks. Mr. Gaines?
Very good question. Thank you very much for asking it. I think we're in a very good shape, specifically compared to a couple years ago when none of this really existed. So for that, we're very thankful. As I mentioned earlier, all the projects that we have been collaborating on with the Army are included in the plan. There are a couple here and there that, you know, may be underfunded in terms of estimates that, you know, in our opinion. But I think by and large, those are small differences that can be easily overcome. But I agree with Mr. Gathright that there are some projects that I think that we can pull forward, that we can execute quicker if the funding is there. And so we would be happy to provide that list of projects if you'd like.
Yes, that'd be great. Thanks.
You know, I agree with my colleagues and don't have a lot to add on top of that, but I do believe that the funding level is appreciated, especially for Lake City and what we see there, and we can actually move to the left if there was increased funding. But there is priorities that have to be established, and I think they were done in the modernization plan.
The last question I had is probably for General McGinnis, but all of you. But I've heard that your production request has not increased due to what's going on in Ukraine. So does that need to be increased? I mean, or were you satisfied with, it seemed like the Army was saying that they're going through this reevaluation stage, and then they will come to you with the next contract. So how comfortable do you feel with, are we meeting the needs? Are they coming through?
Ma'am, that's a question I would defer to Mr. Bush, and Mr. Bush, I think, responded to your question on that, saying that there's a response that's going to be imminent,
Okay.
going to be sent over to you.
Yeah, Mr. Gathright.
Given that each of these products start with manufacturing in Radford and Holston, I can share with you that we are in discussions with the Army on some of these replacement supplies. So that's moving forward. I think the positive from a Radford and Holston perspective is these products support other weapons as well. So we're able to move forward with that production timely as soon as we complete those discussions with the Army.
Will you be able to meet the increased demand if they come to you and say, we need a whole bunch more?
Yes, ma'am.
Great.
Initial activity has really focused on some reprioritization of production requirements. I think the majority of the activities surrounding Ukraine and providing stockpiles of ammunition to them will come in that secondary tranche of replacement contracts, which we won't see for some time.
I don't have visibility right now on whether or not it's going to increase, but to answer your second part of your question, if it does, we're ready to.
Very good. Well, we all appreciate what you do and how important you are to our national defense, kind of the unsung heroes sometimes I think people just take for granted in this country. Of course, there's bombs, there's ammunition, but it's a lot more goes into that, and I thank you for your diligence every day to make sure that we have what we need. So thank you, and please pass on our appreciation to the workforce. I yield back.
And seeing no other testimony coming, again, on behalf of the committee, thank you for sharing your thoughts. It's good to have you here. Look forward to you coming back and telling us how well the plan is being implemented. We are adjourned.